Welcome to everyone joining for this afternoon's webinar with Ash Mann, what to do now and what to do next, looking at digital strategy moving forward. We'll be underway just after 2 o'clock. It's about 220 of you registered for this one, so just takes a little while for everyone to join. Last one of the week tomorrow. He's very box office, is Hugh Topping. What can we learn from Netflix and Amazon when we start welcoming audiences back? There's over 300 of you registered for that one already. Monday after digital, got a panel about quick wins, looking at pay-per-click, social media and other user experience issues. Double header on Monday as well with Stage 22 looking at patron travel. And they've got some interesting research looking at will people travel post-corona for entertainment. So that's coming up tomorrow with Hugh, and then a double header on Monday. But we'll be underway with Ash just after 2 o'clock. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this TPC webinar series webinar, What to Do Now and What to Do Next with Ash Mann from Substract. My name is Andrew Thomas and I'm the director of the Teaching Professionals Conference. So unfortunately, I had to postpone this year, so we've moved a great deal of our content online. And we picked up this lovely piece that Ash put forward as well. So thanks to him for that. A little bit of housekeeping. We'll be about 45 minutes today. Probably won't go to the whole hour, depending on Q&A. We are recording as of now, and we'll be on demand if you have to duck away with kids, pets, or Ocado deliveries later on in the next 45 minutes. You can catch it on the website or on YouTube. Ash has got a bit of a presentation, maybe a bit of discussion. We often find things to talk about, he and I, and then we'll be on to a Q&A. You'll find the Q&A box at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on your operating system. Hit the Q&A button, pop your question in. You can give a thumbs up to questions you like, or make comments on other people's questions as well. And when we get to the end of Ash's presentation, we'll dive into those. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Ash Mann from Substract.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Let me do the fiddly taking over the screen sharing thing.
That's a technical term, isn't it?
Yep, that is absolutely a technical term. So let me move this out of the way. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name, as Andrew has just said, is Ash. I'm the managing director at a digital agency called Substract, and I'm also the strategy director at a strategic brand agency called Impact. This is a photo of what I look like. Here are some Twitter handles if you would like to talk to me on Twitter, and there is an email address if you would like to get in touch. Both of the organizations I work at are almost entirely concerned with the cultural sector, with working with cultural organizations. Here are some of the organizations that we work with, and I hope some of what I'm going to cover today is useful in helping you to refine your thinking around your digital activity. It's worth saying that I know many people are currently either furloughed or still working and having to cover numerous roles. You know, lockdown is still a thing and everyone is really, really stressed. But I hope what I'm going to cover today provides a bit of a roadmap for revitalizing your thinking around digital and provides a few useful ways into thinking meaningfully about what is undeniably a vast topic. Today, I am probably going to pose more questions than answers. In fact, I'm purposefully going to be doing that because I think things are changing and evolving so quickly that really uncertainty is the only certainty at the moment. Anyone pretending they have all the answers is doing just that, pretending. I'm not going to try and diagnose the crisis or tell you about the impact it has undeniably had on your businesses and your lives. Instead, today, I'm going to try and reflect on some of the conversations I've been having with colleagues at cultural organisations, both here in the UK and around the world. I want to try and share some of the thoughts around the issues that people have been identifying as challenges, and maybe share some ideas about where I think we should all be focusing and the questions we should be posing to ourselves so that we can best equip ourselves to respond to unprecedented situations, new normals, and the world both during and after the current crisis. Because I don't think any of us know what the future holds at the moment or at what pace it is going to arrive. So instead, let's try to focus on the things that are within our control and that we have the ability to influence. Potentially that could be everything, but that's way too big and way too paralyzingly overwhelming. So I'm going to be touching on quite a broad range of topics today, from brand and institutional culture through to content strategy, thinking about commercialization and how to interrogate whether or not your current digital thinking, tools and activity is fit for purpose. Because I realize that a lot of what I'm going to be suggesting is going to be a way to begin conversations with your colleagues or to help start to guide your thinking. As I said before, I'm not going to be trying to provide answers that fit everyone. I think work in this area is most successfully explored when it is a collaborative effort and when people approach it with a sort of open and inquiring mind. Specifically today, I'm going to look at these areas. So structures and mindsets, understanding the demands of digital, sort of creative consumption within the current COVID crisis, talk a bit about unbundling. I'm going to focus on brand, audiences, how we measure success. I will look a little bit at tools and systems, and we'll finally have a bit of a chat about commercial thinking. And I'm going to try and do all of that in about 30 minutes, and then I hope there'll be plenty of time for a few questions and a bit of discussion with Andrew. It's been interesting to watch the entire cultural sector be shoved through an enforced program of digital transformation over the past few months. Organizations who couldn't imagine themselves without their buildings suddenly had to come up with answers to who they were in a world where every arts organization became digital by default almost overnight. And it's been intriguing and inspiring, but at times infuriating to watch how the sector has responded to that challenge. I really believe that the organizations who are most willingly embracing the current enforced crisis as an opportunity to review and refresh their understanding of who they are and what they do will be the organizations who emerge most strongly from where we are at the moment. And that means we are probably going to have to embrace change in a way that we haven't yet had to in our sector. And I think that change will involve changing how we engage with and serve our audiences and visitors, change in the way that we market and sell our products, and change in the way that we operate. I think simply hoping that we can bunker down and wait for things to snap back to normal, whatever that is, I just don't think that's going to happen. And indeed, do we really want things to go back to the way they were before? There was lots that wasn't great about how we did things just a few months ago. And with digital, I think there's an area where there is opportunity, and I would say the need for us to think again about how we've been doing things. Now, the next quote has been overused, but I think it so perfectly fits the reality of the cultural sector's engagement with digital that I'm going to use it again. So a quote from the famous investor Warren Buffett: "It's only when the tide goes out that you see who has been swimming naked." And over the past few months, we have seen the tide go out, and wow, so many of us were swimming naked when it came to the digital agenda in this sector. What this showed, I think, is something that we've all been aware of to varying degrees, that the digital agenda in cultural institutions has been, at best, patchily addressed. And there are numerous valid reasons for this, but I hope some of what I'm going to cover today will show you why that really needs to change and how you can begin those conversations wherever you work. so often digital has been most willingly engaged with, where it has allowed organizations to directly replace analog processes. That seems to be the easiest thing for people to engage with. Most obviously, that has perhaps been around the marketing and selling of tickets for shows or events. I'm not sure how directly digital has affected how roles are created or how teams are structured and resourced. And rarely, if ever, has it impacted the core thing, whatever that thing might be, whatever your art is. Now, Kasia Hartig has been doing some interesting research around delivering value online for the museum sector. And in a piece that she published a couple of months ago, she included interviews with numerous digital folks working in museums around the world. Everyone who was working successfully in this area identified similar reasons for this success, but also similar challenges. Not least the challenge around being prepared to meet digital on its own terms as an ongoing, evolving and iterative stream of work that needs to be constantly responding to changes in user behavior in the wider world. Douglas Hegley at the Minneapolis Institute of Art observes that doing digital well includes being prepared for ongoing iterative work to keep the experience fresh, up to date and evolving with the innovations that take place in the digital realm that is all around us. And structurally, that probably means we need to revisit how we're currently doing things. Because if digital is going to be engaged with properly and fully, that probably means it needs to be resourced in a way other than denoting one, often junior member of staff, often in the marketing team, as the digital person in inverted commas for an entire organization. Because this area is so all-encompassing and evolves so quickly that it needs expert senior leadership if it's going to be utilized successfully. Now, Douglas's role, that of Chief Digital Officer, is not a title you see particularly often, especially not here in the UK. You sometimes see Director of Digital, but again, not often. Job titles and organizational structures are fascinating to me because they tell you so much about what an organization deems is and isn't important. And what's clear, I think, is that digital hasn't, on the whole, been given a voice in strategic conversations. And I think increasingly that really needs to change. I want to look a bit at the demands that digital makes of creative thinking and the changes in audience experience, engagement, and expectation that digital creates. Because I think the most obvious result of digital not having a seat at the top table is the fact that digital hasn't really had a meaningful impact on the way that we deliver product, whatever that product is, or the makeup of the product itself. And where digital has been engaged with, we've primarily focused on inserting technology into the physical experience, forcing digital to interact with the live, rather than looking at inverting or flipping that relationship. And it's this second perspective that I really think we need to engage with. How do cultural experiences get extended, reformed, and redistributed within a digital framework? Now, we run a series of events and a podcast called Digital Works. And at Digital Works 10 that we held back in April, Matt Locke from Story Things was exploring how the materiality of a medium impacts the way in which it is used creatively. He talked about the technology of television and the ways people watched impacted what was made, how programs were structured, and then how those programs were scheduled. And an example of this is called hammocking, a technique used in broadcast programming whereby a less popular television program is scheduled between two popular ones in the hope that viewers watch it. And hammocking was super successful. The entire concept of programming in this way was based on the attention model that people engaged with when they were sitting down to watch linear broadcast TV. It affected schedules, it affected the length of programs, and it affected what got made. Now, this worked absolutely brilliantly when TV was a linear medium, but it's becoming irrelevant in an age of Netflix and iPlayer when the schedule has far less control over how and when people watch programs. This materiality effect was also obvious in music, where the physical capacity of vinyl originally shaped the length of a typical album at around between 44 and 52 minutes. Then CDs came in and gave musicians another half an hour to play with, and the average length of an album got longer. And now albums, once the spine of the music industry, are all but irrelevant as a format. iTunes changed the unit of interest to be a song, and now Spotify gives you access to all the music ever for a monthly subscription. or even free if you can stand the ads. And this, in turn, has impacted the way that music is produced. The average length of a song has gotten shorter in this new age of streaming. The average length of a song has shortened by about 30 seconds over the past 15 years. And in this context, digital has its own materiality, but it is hugely complex and often contradictory. It could easily be a talk all on its own. Referencing Matt's talk again at Digital Works, I think this slide here sums up the challenge. Digital at the moment is pulling in two very polar directions, very, very short form and very, very long form. And traditional cultural experiences don't fit neatly into this paradigm. So I think the time has come, or rather it arrived a fair while ago, but maybe now it can't be ignored, to think radically and differently about how we do our core thing. Because I don't want us to wait until the edges have been nibbled away at so much, or things have changed so much without us responding to them, that we stubborn ourselves into irrelevance. I'm not saying the audience for live experience is going away, far from it, but in a world that has been through a traumatic event, where everyone has been forced to use digital tools to a level they never had before, and in financially straitened times such as the ones we're moving into, we can't afford not to directly engage with the different demands that digital experiences place on us. Or rather, to put a more positive spin on it, can we afford to ignore this massive opportunity? We're already seeing shifts in the way audiences find and consume cultural content. And coming the other way, we are also starting to see shifts in the way that cultural content is created. I mean, my parents now regularly video call and watch theatre on YouTube. This was literally unthinkable even 3 months ago, believe me. I've had conversations with organisations who have seen increased and different types of engagement with the new digital activity they've been doing recently. It has also started to impact the form of some of this work. I mean, there's definitely a lockdown aesthetic emerging. We've seen theatres report participants joining workshops from all over the country. For example, the Groundlings in Los Angeles have had people joining their online improv workshops from around the world. One example, perhaps, of the lockdown aesthetic is we've seen the popularisation of the mosaic performance. There's a screenshot of one here. These are comprised of multiple individually recorded performances put together to create an ensemble performance. Another example is the renewed interest and engagement with play readings, short individual performances with very little in the way of props, costumes or sets. It's been fascinating and frankly exciting, I think, to see organisations such as the National Theatre of Scotland and High Tide commissioning work specifically to be performed in this way. Here's a screenshot of Brian Cox performing in what looks like his kitchen as part of the NTS's Scenes for Survival series of plays. And institutions around the world have seen millions of people accessing the new content they've been putting out digitally over just the past couple of months. So there is an audience out there, and it may not be the same as your usual audience. In fact, it's likely to be people who have never and may never be a physical visitor to your venue. And you need to think about how you are going to engage with and service that audience, and indeed whether you want to. Our friends at NCC Theatre in New York had people paying to watch their recent online performance of Beirut from Brazil, Mexico, Australia, Japan, the UK, as well as the US. And when I spoke with them last week, we dug into the data a little bit and found that almost 80% of the people who had bought a ticket to watch that performance were new to MCC. And they are now considering how to continue this new digital strand of work to be able to keep servicing this brand new audience. Because we now have an audience who is more digitally engaged in more aspects of their life than ever before. And of course, live cultural experiences are a powerful and much needed antidote to that. But to absent ourselves entirely from a meaningful presence in the medium in which the vast, vast majority of people now engage with the world feels foolish. And to meaningfully engage with that medium, we need to radically rethink how we do what we do. Simply filming live performances of plays and putting them onto a screen is not that. It may be a part of that, but we've been doing this for more than half a century. Armchair theatre started on ITV in 1956. It is not new. It does not engage with the potential of digital experiences in a meaningful way. And on the whole, it is expensive and complicated. And I'm not convinced that for many organizations, this is where they're going to find value. Creating a sense of event and community around these broadcasts, whether that's with live interaction in watch parties or tweet alongs or whatever it might be, is better than nothing. But I still think it's just fiddling with the format. It is not fundamentally rethinking the core proposition. Unbundling and the atomization of content and services has been a thing for decades now. Newspapers, music, television have all been broken into their component parts, and you can now choose to consume pretty much anything you want, however you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. This diagram shows how the traditional newspaper has been broken down into its component parts, and how there are now individual services and platforms delivering those pieces of content. There's a really good article on this subject on the Stratechery blog, and that article walks through the shifts in the media landscape over the past 40 years or so and ends up here. The yellow is content, the green is revenue, and the blue is audience. I'd really like us to start thinking about what does the cultural equivalent of this look like? Or what could it look like? Do you at your organization have a clear-eyed understanding of why your audiences come to spend their time and their money with you? What is the value that they get out of that? And how could that same value be delivered in a digital context? For this thinking to be truly transformative, you need to start applying that frame of reference to everything you do. You know, that will include education and outreach work, that will include donor engagement, that will include customer experience. What are the component parts of all this activity? What value does that activity deliver? What need are you meeting? And then you'd be able to start to understand what that could look like in a digital context. You know, it could be around offering classes online. Long before COVID became a fixture in all of our lives, the Royal Academy of Art had been doing Life Drawing Live, which was entirely intended for a global digital audience. It was a life drawing class that was broadcast from the life drawing room at the Royal Academy, but it was rethought, repackaged and reformatted specifically for a digital audience. And in delivering work in this way, they reached new audiences. They reached new audiences in a new way, and they reached people who, in all likelihood, will never walk through the doors of the Royal Academy in London. We've seen something similar with Channel 4's Grayson's Art Club. You know, this is not a standard piece of broadcast television. It's instead trying to do something different, something with genuine audience participation at the heart of what it is trying to do. And our friends at the Children's Theatre Company in Minneapolis and Shakespeare's Globe here in London have both this month launched programmes of work which will deliver high quality theatre education, classes and workshops entirely online. And then turning this lens to your development activity, might it involve virtual donor drinks? You know, the CBSO and Dulwich Gallery have both been doing this. And turning again to your core thing, should an entire strand of your artistic programme be digital? I was speaking to someone just last week who had made the suggestion at their organisation that they look to do one less normal, in inverted commas, production a year so they can meaningfully invest in a digital programme of work. And I think these are the types of questions we need to start engaging with. Now, it wasn't intended to be digital only, but this piece of work in the tanks at the Tate Modern was due to open the same week the lockdown was announced. So it was quite quickly reimagined as a piece of content intended just for a digital audience. Now, for what it's worth, I think it's slightly too long, but it is interesting that they made that decision. They made that decision quickly. And I think these sorts of conversations are now essential. And it's perhaps easier to have these conversations now we've all had at least a glimpse of what it might look like if you were forced to exist as a digital-only organisation. Because we're going to have to evolve to survive. And if we do it successfully, we will not just survive, we will thrive. But we need to start thinking about what that could look like now. Because COVID has shown us as a sector, mostly, to be unprepared for these conversations. But we can begin to change that by doing what we do best and thinking creatively and critically about what we do. And in order to do that, we probably need to admit that the thinking and tools that got us to where we are today are probably not going to be the right tools and thinking to get us through this and beyond this successfully. I think the organizations who have been able to most confidently, meaningfully, and successfully engage with questions like this are undoubtedly those who have the clearest sense of self. And I think that ultimately comes back to brand. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on brand. I am not. However, I have worked on enough projects with enough organizations to understand that when you have a strong embedded brand at an organization, you normally have a healthier institutional culture, you do more productive, more confident, more successful work, you are more effective as an organization, and your stakeholders value and engage with you more meaningfully. I think brand is one of those terms that is frequently and sometimes purposefully misunderstood. I am not talking about logos here. Fortunately, with my work at Impact, I have regular conversations with someone who is an expert on brand, Rob McPherson, and he neatly explains brand as follows. Brand is how the ideas you stand for in people's minds are made real in the world by your actions in a recognizable verbal and visual style. It is concerned with answering how you create, define, and deliver on the expectation people have of you. And it's been surprising and worrying to see how many organizations struggled with these questions, because I think it is in times of crisis that this thinking provides the glue to hold together your organizational thinking. And it is also this thinking that will provide you with the fuel and direction to move forward. It is this clarity around your strategic thinking that allows organizations to pivot with some degree of confidence when shifts like COVID are thrust upon us. It allows you to understand what you could do, but equally to understand what not to do. And if you are not confident or clear in your thinking on this area, then everything that follows will be equally confused, misaligned, and ineffective. And that has perhaps been less of a problem until recently. Lots of organizations have had enough sort of internal momentum to keep moving forward without paying this sort of thing too much attention. But I think recently that has come to a grinding halt. And some of the rushed and perhaps panicked activity we've seen over recent months has stemmed, I believe at least in part, from this lack of clarity. I think questions are a good way into sharpening your thinking and starting a conversation. And on the question of brand, I think that these points could be a useful starting point. I think organizations who can answer questions like these confidently are likely to be operating more successfully than those who can't. And if you can't answer these questions with a sense of clarity, then I'd suggest that indicates a broader question about culture, about values, about brand, and a conversation that you probably need to start and is probably overdue. You know, are you confident that your organization has strong, articulated, shared and embedded brand values? If you ask 10 colleagues what your organization stood for, would you get 10 similar answers? What is your organization's brand promise, and does it do a good job of keeping that? Is your organization's brand well articulated and understood externally? And where does brand live in your organization? Is there an opportunity to feed into or perhaps start that conversation? Next, I want to look a bit at audiences. You know, we matter to people, or at least we like to think we do. But do we really know why people choose to spend their time and money with us? Do we have a meaningful dialogue with our audiences and visitors? Do we listen? And when we do listen, do we understand and do we respond? Or are customers treated a bit like an occupational hazard? In order to be able to have a critical, analytical, and meaningful conversation about how your digital activity is working, indeed how everything you do is working, and how it could effectively change, we need to have clarity about what your users, your customers, value. There are numerous ways to start working towards unpicking and understanding this. What you see here on screen is an empathy map. Other devices into this conversation include customer journey mapping, service blueprints, personas, user stories, experience maps. I'm not going to rank them all, but they all aim to do something similar. Put you in your user or your customer's shoes to understand their needs and their motivations. And we really are going to need to be ruthless about this. More than ever, it is likely we are all going to have to do less and be more efficient in what we do choose to do. So we need to make sure that we are making smart choices around that shift in activity. Now, Seth Godin talks about the idea of a minimum viable audience. What is the smallest group of people who will sustain your business? And this area of thinking is about targeting the people who will particularly benefit from what you are offering. He asks, what is the minimum number of people you would need to influence to make it worth the effort? I think this is anathema to the way most arts marketing has been done in the past. Historically, it's been about convincing as many people as possible that there's something in what you do for them. which is of course difficult. And when you think about it, a slightly strange way of going about things. If everyone loved everything for the same reasons, then the world would be a very strange place. I think changing your thinking in this way forces you to be far more specific, which in turn forces you to engage differently. And I would argue is likely to drive up the quality and the specificity of the services and experience that you deliver. However, that is only possible if you really, truly understand who your audience is and why they value what you do. This probably involves asking some questions, although perhaps not yet another survey. There are lots of other ways to find out what your users think, from the ways that they behave in your venue or on your digital platforms, to the things they say about you to your face, and even behind your back. I mean, have a look at the Google reviews of wherever you work. I'm sure you will learn something. I think as a sector, we need to stop trying to be all things to all people. We are probably going to have to do less, and in doing so, I think we have the chance to be better. And are you confident at your organization that you understand why people spend time and money with you? And are you confident you understand who those people are? Do you know who your people are or who they could be? Do you have a meaningful dialogue with your users? If not, why not? And do you understand what people value in their interactions with you? And how do you make that information shareable and actionable in your organization? I want to talk a bit now about measuring success and a question of data. How is data used in your organization? Are you regularly looking to better understand how folks are interacting with you and analyzing what that data tells you? The great thing about digital is it throws up all sorts of data. Look at how your users are currently and historically engaging with your digital activity, social, web, anything you're putting out online. But don't focus on vanity metrics. Spend the time to really understand what your users find useful and valuable, what they're saying about you, and work out what that all means. This may mean you need to spend time changing how you're measuring that activity, and that you need to bring in some external expertise to help you make sense of that likely overwhelming sea of data. This will not be wasted money, I assure you. Now, there are numerous agencies and organizations that can help you with this. Katie Moffat and her team at the Audience Agency, and Chris Unit and his team at One Further, to name just two. Please don't rely on old data. You may have commissioned a report 2 years ago that gave you a snapshot of your activity back then, but whilst that can provide some helpful context, it is not a useful and reliable foundation to base your insights on today. I saw this quote the other day. I thought it was quite good. Data is like fish. It doesn't age well. What was true last year may not be true today. You need to give yourself the best chance to make good decisions by generating an up-to-date picture of how your users are engaging with your digital activity. With clarity about your institutional purpose and values, and a real understanding of your customers' motivations, you will naturally be able to begin to understand what is and isn't working and where new opportunities could exist. But with a purposefully optimized and well understood strategy around how you gather, analyze, and respond to data, you will give yourself the best chance to make the most of this clarity and understanding. There's some questions, again, to perhaps start the conversation at your organization. Is data around your digital activity used to inform what you do, but equally what you don't do? Are you clear about what each part of your digital activity is supposed to do? And are you measuring whether each part is successful or not? Do you even understand the data that you're gathering, or is it all just going into a folder somewhere on some shared drive and is gathering virtual dust? Is that data actionable? Do you have clarity about what happens if a number goes significantly up or significantly down? What does that change? And then are you able to use the data to inform and contextualize your wider thinking? I'll talk a bit now about tools and systems. It's been interesting to observe how massively exposed some of us have found ourselves with the demands the last few months have made on our digital tools. Whether that's been around mass cancellations and refunds, promoting and monetizing digital activity, or simply taking one-off donations, there have been numerous examples of the tools we all use suddenly not quite being as useful as we'd assumed they were. And I'd say now is probably a good time to review all of your digital tools. You will have had a glimpse of how well or not they can serve you when the primary use case changes. And if you've done the work to understand how your digital activity needs to serve your organization and your users, it will quickly become clear what is and isn't working. Because I think we have for too long allowed business needs to trump user experience. Procurement priorities have, perhaps understandably, been driven overwhelmingly by internal needs, but as a result, we've ended up with an ecosystem of solutions that has developed products and services that bring great efficiencies to our internal processes, whilst all too often presenting our users with a confusing patchwork of experience. If you're asking me to go through a 5-step process to give you a donation, if I have to create an account before I can do anything on your website, if I'm shown inexplicable error messages, if your digital event is telling me it has sold out, or if I can't access the work you're doing on my device, then you are going to lose me as a customer. Your tools need to help offer an easy experience above all else. Get that right first. Complexity and cleverness can come afterwards, but the important word here is ease. Now, BJ Fogg, a professor at Stanford University, has done some really interesting research around motivation. His research basically shows that if something is difficult to do, then the motivation required to complete that task needs to be higher. This is perhaps stating the obvious, but how often do we let this reality influence the decisions that we make around the digital experiences that we create? The harder we make something to do, the less likely someone is to do it, or the greater the external prompt needs to be for them to be motivated to complete the thing. And the amount of time we all spent engaging with digital experiences was already enormous before this pandemic. Now, after 2 or 3 months spent nothing but engaging with digital experiences to order our shopping, help our children with school, speak to our friends, relatives, and colleagues, and conduct many aspects of our lives, expectations of what good looks like in a digital context will not have got any kinder. We need to be frank about the quality of the experiences we are creating. I would also like to see the shift in thinking about digital experiences as isolated experiences, and instead move to a wider, more all-encompassing understanding of customer experience. Now, there's a growing specialism around service design, and whilst this area isn't especially new, it was first introduced about 25 years ago, the increasing importance of multi-channel, multi-touchpoint user experiences is giving this area of thinking an increased relevance and prominence. Now, Lou Down, who's former design director of the UK government and founder of service design, also at the UK government, has written a really good book which looks at the principles of good service design. It's really worth a read, and I think it provides a super useful framework through which to judge whether or not the services that we are all offering work as well as they could or as well as they should. 15 principles are listed here, and numbers 5 to 10 feel particularly relevant to a number of digital cultural experiences I've endured recently around work in a way that is familiar, require no prior knowledge, be agnostic of organizational structures, require the minimum possible steps to complete, be consistent, have no dead ends. If we're looking to achieve this with our digital experiences, they are going to be better digital experiences. And in a more digitized landscape, physical boundaries become less important, which is great, but you are then potentially competing with everyone else who does what you do and has access to a digital audience. I think this is why brand is key. This is why understanding what your audience wants is vital. But even then, to reach the most people in the best way possible, I think another ingredient is key, and that ingredient is collaboration. There's a nice quote around this. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Your audience is not just your audience. They are cultural consumers who likely have relationships with numerous other institutions and individuals. Being an active part of a meaningful network is a powerful way to both grow awareness and audience numbers, but also to foster relationships with other organizations, which in turn can have numerous benefits around shared infrastructure and expertise. These networks allow you to share knowledge, but also to share risk. And I'm well aware that networks like this already exist, but it's been interesting to see how they've begun to manifest themselves digitally, formed around geographic or genre similarities. A couple of small recent examples which address this reality. The European Concert Hall organisation, ECHO, members of that organisation featured details of live streams happening at other member organisations on each of their websites. They also scheduled their live streams so that they didn't clash. Now, this is just a small but useful way of working together. And a recent Bristol takeover online saw Colston Hall working with local musicians on a live streamed festival to raise money for the creative sector in the southwest of England. Collaboration in this way will also allow you to directly address the fact that working creatively with digital demands a very different approach and skill set than producing traditional cultural work. And finally, I think we need to talk about money. Whilst the rush to put everything online all at the same time for free has been mostly well received, I'm not sure that anyone is under any illusion that this is a sustainable model. We need to start thinking about how we view this digital activity as part of our broader range of commercial thinking. Are you going to have a premium strand of digital work? Will that be performance, education, or something else? Or are you going to use freely available digital work as a way to reach new audiences and drive people to pay for your physical live experiences? Have you conducted any work around assessing what IP assets you have access to? What do your contracts with artists allow you to do? Do you have a clear sense of how you might price digital work? Do you have any sense of customer sensitivity in this area? Do you know how to create and drive demand for this type of work? Are you going to offer one-off access, or will people be able to catch up? What is the impact of these decisions on the likely size of your audience? And are your existing systems able to handle the e-commerce demands of this type of activity? Now, it's unlikely that any of us have all the answers to these questions, but if we start asking these questions today, then we are more likely to start to understand what the answers could be. I realise I've covered a huge range of topics in a relatively short amount of time here, so let me just recap my main points, or the things that I think are the most useful areas for us to focus on improving. 1, engage with digital strategically. Ask the question, are you structured for success? This will not be a quick process, but digital needs to stop being the preserve of one siloed department. It is not a marketing thing or a sales thing. It needs to be embedded across everything you do, and that requires senior buy-in and dedicated skills and resources. The cultural sector does suffer from a lack of digitally literate leadership, which is not an easy problem to solve. And whilst digital expertise is something that takes time to build and is perhaps an unfair expectation to place on cultural leaders, I think digital literacy is no longer something we can ignore. Now, Kati Price, head of digital at the V&A, has been conducting research in this area over the past few years. This research is really, really interesting and useful and well worth a look. She's analysed structural issues, resourcing, the benefits of in-house teams versus external providers, and much more. But on the subject of leadership, it is this issue of literacy that she highlights. You need to at least be able to speak the language or understand what's being discussed to be able to meaningfully pass that information. As she says here, your executive board does not need to know the ins and outs of setting up event tracking and Google Analytics, but they do need to work their way around a technical architecture diagram. They do need to understand what digital channels you're using and to what end. Digital literacy is important. I've been reading about how digital transformation has impacted government over the past decade, and it feels like we in the cultural sector are facing many of the same challenges. It is a structural weakness for many organisations, regardless of size or sector. Digital is a relatively new area, and the way that sector leadership develops means that it still hasn't been addressed by many of the current or upcoming leaders. And this lack of digital literacy means that digital isn't properly engaged with, and weak or woolly thinking and solutions are given a free pass far more regularly than they should be. I think the importance of digital means that we really can't forgive that anymore, and we certainly wouldn't in any other business or mission critical areas of our work. And Martha Lane Fox, founder of lastminute.com and more recently .everyone, made this observation, which I increasingly think should be the standard to which we hold the leadership of our cultural institutions. But this is not going to be quick or easy change to make. Leaders are not made overnight, so we will all have to do work to support this shift in thinking. And perhaps a useful place to start is by asking the question, what do your experiences look like if digital is the venue? I would really like to see the sector move away from purely passive broadcast type experiences. As I say, those have been happening since the 50s and aren't necessarily, I think, where we're going to excel. A couple of organisations we work with who have made this shift over the past couple of years and are now reaping the benefits, the Shakespeare's Globe and Opera North. Two very different types of organisation, but both organisations where digital has exec buy-in and where the creative possibilities of digital are being explored meaningfully. As is the potential for digital then the work of everyone in the organization, from membership departments and fundraising through to education and engagement work, as well as the core thing that they both do. However, in order for this shift to most meaningfully take place, digital has to be part of the strategic conversation. And that is most successfully achieved where there is a senior role with digital expertise, resources, and responsibilities. Number 2, understand who you are and the value you can deliver. Coming back to Rob's definition of brand, is it clear how your organization would respond to each of these points? If not, then I really recommend you start the conversation around brand. If it isn't clear around how you set and meet expectations that people have of you, then have that brand conversation in your organization. Rob is a great person to speak to about this. There's lots of other great people working in the sector that can help support a conversation around brand. Number 3, interrogate who you matter to and why you matter. You need to be really, really clear about who your people are. I think in order to be able to creatively and successfully begin to respond to digital or to identify new opportunities worth pursuing, this is absolutely key. However, don't worry, this is a new conversation. Even some of the biggest cultural institutions have only tackled this area recently. This quote is from a 2018 interview with Lucy Sinclair, former director of media and audiences at the Royal Opera House. She says, "We've never really talked about at a brand level about why anybody might want to come. We only talked about what they might come to see." If this feels relevant to your organization, then I'd urge you to start trying to understand this sooner rather than later. It will help steer your thinking in so many other areas. And then the question of data and analytics. I would encourage you all to think about how you're measuring and judging success. Are you managing to measure the things that matter to you in a digital context and in a real world context? If not, then that needs attention. If you're not working out whether or not the things that matter to you are successful or not, then how can you continue to function as an organization? And it's on this 5th point, it is all too easy to become institutionalized when we work at cultural organizations. Our experience becomes further and further removed from the lived experience of many of our customers and users. So I would encourage you to regularly review these experiences internally and also with external user testing. Be really clear about when something isn't working or when it isn't good enough. I think that's key to ensuring that your experiences that you're delivering are effective or where time and attention needs to be spent improving them. Now, we are lucky to work in a sector where collaboration isn't a dirty word, and it happens far more frequently than it does in other sectors. However, collaboration around digital activity doesn't seem to be something that happens very often. And I think we would all be more successful and reach people in a more impactful way if we considered this way of working more frequently, whether that's around sharing the burden of distribution so you reach more of the people who are likely to value what you do, or whether that's around shared infrastructure and resources to reduce the financial risk involved in engaging in this type of work. I think there are numerous opportunities for the sector to explore. And perhaps there are people like the Arts Council and the Space and Nesta who should be helping this happen. The commercialization conversation around digital activity needs to start, if it hasn't started already. Conversations about IP and rights and thinking about new models of pricing and value proposition are all complex areas of thinking. But nonetheless, this is what we need to start engaging with. If our physical venues aren't going to be sources of meaningful revenue for 6 months or a year or more, then digital provides us with an opportunity to fill that gap. But this is not an area that we as a sector have historically made much progress in. So again, we need to start these conversations now. And if I was going to boil this all down into 4 things that you can start to do right now, I would suggest these are a good place to start. Ask 10 colleagues about what your organization stands for. Use that as a basis for conversation about culture, brand, and values. Ask if you understand what your audiences value in their interactions with you, but be really specific about that. Check if you're measuring what really matters. And number 4, make sure you understand the quality of your digital experiences from your user's perspective. Rate the quality and ease of your experiences out of 10. All 4 of these things can be done for no money. They can hopefully be done in amongst all the other things that you're worried about at the moment. And I think the answers to these questions will give you clarity about what works for you now and why and what you need to do next. Well, good luck. Okay, Andrew, that's me done.
Thank you very much indeed, Ash. So I'm just going to press the right buttons because I'm learning my digital. Trying to press the right buttons. I've got a lot of questions.
Okay.
But then, so probably have everyone who's on here. So we've got one in there from Leon already. So if you haven't, if you've got a question, folks, pop down to the Q&A or up to the Q&A wherever you find it on your screen and ask a question. I did actually, I'm glad I was on mute because I'd actually laugh out loud rather than write LOL when you said people who've sold out online sessions, which I did have a little pop about on Twitter.
Yes, that I may have seen that tweet, Andrew, and folded that in.
Yeah, no, but it is right, that you sold out the internet, and capacity is obviously going to become an issue. And I was really interested as well that, talking about new audiences, because in this webinar session, 62% of people engaging in these webinars have never been to or engaged with TPC before. So I think it's really interesting that, we didn't do this, we did this because I know our 2020 conference was cancelled or postponed, and we had this content, so we moved online. But it's been a huge learning experience to suddenly up and take something that we run every year and then move it online. So there's one question from Leon. Anyone else with questions, if you want to get those in? But I've got a question which goes back to James Bagley, who was on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And digital, and in the rush to do things, do we do digi good or digi just good enough? Is there a line between? We wouldn't put out a brochure with spelling mistakes in, or most of us wouldn't, or badly formatted or with blurred imagery, but is there a line, that minimum viable digital quality product? Has it got to live up to the rest of everything else we do?
Well, I think there's two things that I touched on that I think inform the answer to that, because I think that, or you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. But if you have clarity about what is important to you and you have some digital expertise at a senior level, then I think it will almost naturally become clear where you should be absolutely sweating every single pixel and other things that just need to happen. You use the example of a brochure, and I've worked in cultural institutions where proofing the brochure goes to however many rounds of things, and absolutely everyone in the organization ended up looking at it to make sure that it went out flawlessly, because that thing was deemed to be important, and that people understood the purpose of that thing. Equally, reception staff quickly printing off a sign to say the toilets are broken or closed or whatever it might be, that perhaps had less focus and attention, because that's more of an operational day-to-day thing. So I think that you see sometimes agonizing conversations around aspects of digital activity, which are just, I'm just flabbergasted because I know how busy everyone is, and it surprises me that they have the amount of time to worry about some of the things they're worrying about, yet they're not spending time and attention worrying where I think they should be. And I think that comes back to a lack of clarity about what is important and a lack of understanding about how these things work and how they're received. I think my point about cultural leadership, I wonder how many of the sort of C-suite of many cultural organizations regularly engage with digital experiences in the same way as their audiences. And if they're not doing that, then how can they possibly provide a sort of meaningful voice in that conversation? So I don't really answer your question there, because I think it's a case-by-case basis. There are some things that we need to get much better at moving quickly on, because sorry.
Yeah, I think it's what you touched on there of how often do you engage with digital. I think there's that ticketing professionals conference, ticketing cliche, but we often say, when was the last time you bought a ticket on your website? And I think that doesn't just that's not just tied down to buying a ticket. It is about the whole end-to-end process of everything we do digitally.
Yeah, and you know, and that was sort of that one of those final points about, you know, when we work in cultural organizations, our even buying a ticket at another organization is colored by, you know how the sausage gets made. So it's sort of, you're not going to necessarily be able to put a meaningful judgment on the quality of that experience. So regularly testing your experiences, having some understanding of what your customer is going through in order to engage with and interact with you is essential. I think you can't just rely on tickets being sold and money coming in and assume that everything's okay.
Okay, we've got to dive into the questions.
Yes.
So top of the pile, Mr. Leon Gray, regular caller.
Yes.
How would you encourage continued and progressive digital transformation in organisations in which the internal discussions often revolve around limited budget and the need to see a return on investment and human resource limitations?
Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be the case at many cultural organizations. There are never enough people to do all the work that needs doing, and that's even more the case at the moment where, you know, 80% of some workforces are furloughed. I think that it's, in some organizations, it's going to be a question of deciding what, if you have decided that digital is important, maybe that argument hasn't been won, in which case you need to start having that conversation. And the reality is that your resources are constrained, then you are going to have to stop doing something else in order to prioritize digital. And I think it does need to be prioritized. And I think, you know, we're, as a workforce in this sector, we're quite bad at saying no to things or stopping doing things. We all overstretch ourselves. And so I think, number one, it's about having some priority around how you might reallocate resources. It's around perhaps looking to build out internal expertise and capacity, because then you're not having to rely on agencies. I mean, there's a whole separate talk we can have about, you know, is it more cost effective to build an in-house team or have a sort of network of suppliers? But I think you do need to have some in-house expertise or literacy. You know, again, if you don't have anyone in your organization who can confidently have a conversation about this area of work, then how are you ever going to be able to achieve value for money? You know, you're never going to be able to judge whether or not, number one, you even are getting a return on your investment. But I think it's those are the two key things. It's around priorities, it's around redirecting time and attention internally, and it's about starting to build out internal capacity and expertise.
Brilliant. Right, a couple of comments and then some more questions. No question, but fantastic and thought-provoking (scary) presentation. Most useful webinar so far, and I've been on one every day for the past 2 weeks. So thank you, whoever left that comment.
Very kind.
That's very kind. There was a question in here. It said from Beverly, excellent presentation, thank you. You mentioned near the beginning of your presentation some research about delivering value online. Can you share the details of the author? Beverly, I'd say if you go to @Substract on Twitter, I know Emily and Caspian are on, and someone's been doing a live thread of this webinar on the @Substract. So probably if one of those could pop, or you can, Ash, put it later on Twitter.
Yeah, I will post. I will reference all of my sources and post links to all of it.
There we go.
It's been interesting because there has been obviously a renewed interest in the value of online audiences recently, and there is quite a lot of there is some academic research in this area. Typically, the museum sector, as ever with research, seems slightly better at looking at this than performing arts, but there is some stuff out there.
Brilliant. I'm going to do one more from the bottom, and then we'll go to the top. Matt, hello from Ticket Time Machine. And he says there's plenty of platforms that have zero upfront cost. You can charge for tickets, accept donations, and sell merchandise. And he's happy to share resources with that. So Matt's details you'll find in the answer to Q&A. He seems to be on every single webinar around the world I go on, Matt. But thank you for that, Matt. Angela's top of the pile with 3 thumbs up. Do you have any examples of small to medium scale receiving venues that have developed a successful digital offering? 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Off the top of my head, no, and which is not helpful, I realize. But I wonder with those organizations, if you don't have ownership over the product that is coming onto your main stage, then presumably you do other types of activity that have an audience that you do have more control and that you to use the term, own the IP of. And perhaps that is a more sensible starting point to achieve digital engagement than looking to do a live broadcast of Mamma Mia.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to a music venue the other day that I'm doing another project for on something else, and their CEO was telling me that their digital during this lockdown, when they've having their performances in the venue, is they've been doing concerts, not paid for but free, to care homes.
Yeah.
So obviously music's slightly different to theatrical work, but their idea was not necessarily to make money or grow audiences, but it was to put back into community, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that with Slung Low up in Leeds, essentially acting as an extension of the social service sector, and Theatre Clwyd in Wales doing things with care homes as well. Digital can be a useful extension to that type of activity.
Okay, I've got one to rile you up,
Yeah.
Which is, can digital be unimportant?
Yeah, probably. If you're in a very, very specific setting and your audience engage with you in a very, very specific way, I think hyper-local organizations, perhaps digital is less important for them. But I would say the reality is, and I have ignored the elephant in the room of digital exclusion and all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
That is an issue. Absolutely, that's an issue. The reality is that the vast majority of people engage with the vast majority of the things they do with digital in some way, and there are elements of what we all do around communications, around customer service, around commerce, that in every other walk of life is delivered digitally. And if we choose not to do that, the cultural sector, I do not think carries the weight in people's lives to be able to strike out alone and refuse to engage with this area of work.
Brilliant. Couple more, and then we'll wrap up. Bronwyn asks this, and there's a lot of great ideas like this I've seen of people saying, why doesn't this exist, or does it? Bronwyn asks, it would be really interesting to get a database set up where venues can, brackets anonymously, input audience engagement data from real life and digital events, and then to filter that by art form, location, demographic, etc. Does this exist already, Ash?
So it's very interesting. A couple of people have mentioned something like this recently, and I am aware that there is an AHRC, Arts Humanities Research Council, research project working with the university and with a couple of consultants from the sector looking specifically at this area. I don't know if I'm allowed to say who's involved in it, so I won't, but they're certainly looking at some of the big data sets that are coming out at the moment around digital audiences, and they're really going to start to produce some useful, I would hope, and meaningful sort of analysis of that data. So as far as I'm aware, no, it doesn't exist, but the AHRC are directing some time and attention into making it a thing.
Okay, so other thank yous and bits and pieces coming in through Q&A. Heath asks, if you work in a digital arm of a company, how do you encourage digital literacy and inquisitiveness? Is it demystifying the process or transparency, Ash?
So I've asked this question on a couple of the podcast interviews I've done with people recently. I spoke with Louise Cohen at the Royal Academy and Carty Price at the V&A, and they both absolutely went with transparency. The reality is that for many of your colleagues, digital might not figure very highly. If you're a curator or an archivist, then maybe digital isn't high up your agenda. So it's about these digital teams, digital partner organizations being really, really clear about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And, you then start to move into the realm of soft skills and persuasion and human connection, because you need to start to understand what are the agendas of your colleagues. Everyone has their own agenda at work, and how can the work that you're doing help your colleagues serve their agendas? And that might look like just having wireframes and things up in communal areas. It might look like regular show and tells. So I know the folks at Spectrix do a weekly demo and drink on a Friday afternoon. We at Substract do internal sort of show and tell things. They're really useful ways to, you're not necessarily expecting people to have a critical input at that point, but just to give some profile and some transparency around the thing that you're working on. And certainly when I was speaking to Louise at the Royal Academy, she said they did a big series of workshops when they first introduced their content strategy 3 years ago. And she sort of dusted her hands and thought, great, everyone's engaged, everyone understands. But because the churn of people at working in cultural organizations is relatively high and people forget things, everyone's busy, this sort of internal engagement and explanation strand of work needs to be part of the way that digital teams operate. I think it's almost as important to get buy-in internally and sort of help raise the level of digital literacy and understanding as it is delivering externally facing digital work.
Brilliant. A couple of comments. Thanks. Brilliant webinar. Best webinar I've gauged in the last month. Seriously, thank you. Time for one more. Okay. This is a long one. So it's a long question, short answer, Ash. Several well-equipped, well-funded arts orgs paying top salaries to skilled people with over a decade of good digital engagement have not done so well recently. And now some are front page news demanding bailouts. Is the primary missing link here the commercialization or monetizing one? Will we not need to appeal to millions of audiences paying far less on average to make this work properly? And does this not put us in competition with better equipped vehicles? Hot topic over the last couple of days about
Absolutely.
paying top whack, or are you paying £5 like Amazon?
Yeah.
Quick answer on that, Ash.
The quick answer is, again, referencing a conversation that I will be putting out on the Digital Works podcast next week with the artistic director at MCC Theatre in New York. He said, there is no point trying to compete with Netflix. We are not trying to make a film. We are trying to deliver a theatrical experience online. And I think that is the key thing. We need to think about how we go about delivering cultural experiences online. It is not just about sticking a camera in front of something and putting a live stream online, because as this question says, that does put us in competition with much better equipped vehicles. You're then drawing an equivalence with Amazon, who spend tens of billions on content every year, with Netflix, with Disney Plus, with whoever. The commercialization question has been missing from digital in the cultural sector for years and years and years. The way that digital has been funded, the way that digital has been perceived, the way that digital has existed within organizations means that the focus has never been on that thing. And I think, you're absolutely right. If our thinking and activity was more commercially mature, then perhaps having to close our physical doors would be less of a sort of shattering blow to revenue streams. I'm not going to pretend that's an easy or quick problem to solve, but I think it's certainly something we need to address. I'm really interested in pricing. I've been talking to Robin at Baker Richards about this, because the sort of audience customer perception around what is a fair price for a digital thing is completely different to a ticket to a cultural event. And I think, where do we pitch that? I would suggest £65 is possibly too high.
On that bombshell, Ash, thank you. There's loads more comments piling in.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to everyone with questions. If you've got anything else, at Substract on Twitter, follow them up there. Ash, superb. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. And if anyone wants to get in touch, please, I'm always happy to chat about this sort of thing, and I would love to be a sounding board if I need to be a sounding board.
And if you do want to know what it would look like if we were Netflix or Amazon, catch up with Hugh Topping, 2:00 tomorrow, with a gin on a Friday afternoon. But all it remains for me to do is say a huge thank you, Ash. Superb. Thank you very much indeed for a very informative session.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.